Thank you so much, Lord Johnson, for speaking to NDTV and NDTV World.
Morning.
It's been a somber night for you, but talk to us about the thoughts that are going in right now within the Tories right now in terms of where do they go from here? What could be the possible next steps to revive, revamp and re-energize the party?
Well, it depends on who's left in Parliament when the dust settles on this election. The night has been very tough for the Conservative Party, as you say. It looks like being the party's worst performance for many decades, and we can safely say that. And the party will be severely reduced in numbers, potentially to around 131 seats if the exit poll prediction is correct, from well over 300. So a huge loss of personnel in Parliament for the Conservative parties. And it's from that group of MPs that the new leader will eventually be installed once Rishi Sunak has commenced a leadership contest within the party. So a lot depends on who's still left in the frame. Clearly there are some people who may have ambitions to put themselves forward, who we know are back in Parliament. But it's going to be a battle for the identity and a battle for the direction of the Conservative Party that now takes place over coming weeks.
Absolutely. And as the results poured in, some of them, most of these results are in line with what the exit poll numbers said. But were there some in the Tory camp who were still hoping against hope that when Rishi Sunak announced these elections, he had some game plan and that was going to see and that would feature in those results?
Rishi Sunak's game plan, whatever it was, can't have been to result in this general election picture that we have this morning. This has been the worst campaign in British political history conducted by Rishi Sunak. So he bears a significant responsibility for what has happened. And this is a catastrophic rout for the Conservative Party, be in no doubt about that.
Absolutely. And I think he did take that responsibility in that speech. But what, according to you, were the main reasons for the defeat being the way it was? Much worse than what any would have imagined. What would you think the three factors were?
Well, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, former Prime Minister, I should now say, made the #1 campaign promise to stop the boats. So he raised the salience of an issue to which he didn't have an answer. So in political terms, that was an appalling strategy because he said repeatedly, we will stop the boats, we will stop the boats, we will stop the boats. And yet he didn't appear to have any real policy that would actually deliver on that commitment. And that became immediately apparent when the Rwanda policy, which he was pursuing, started to crumble within his fingers. So that's the first rule of politics. Don't raise the salience of an issue to which you don't have an answer. So he essentially tried to become Reform light, Reform being the party that has emerged under the leadership of Nigel Farage, that focuses almost exclusively on immigration issues and other related issues, cultural issues, and became a sort of a Reform light party. And that has spectacularly failed as a political gambit, underscoring that what really matters if you want to be a national party is that you sort of accept the way the world is rather than want to endlessly hark back to how it was in the 1950s when Britain was a very different kind of country.
Absolutely. And Lord Johnson, I'm sitting here in New Delhi, and what is going in my mind right now and all our viewers is that what does Starmer's entry mean for India? What should we brace ourselves for? Or what is it that we should now be pleasantly surprised and await in terms of Starmer's view, policy and direction for India?
Well, we need to wait for Keir Starmer to form his government and to choose the foreign policy team. Obviously, we have a shadow foreign secretary at the moment in the form of David Lammy, who's extremely experienced. And has been making a lot of effort in the India relationship. You'll have noticed that the Labour Party manifesto did not sort of revisit many of the old themes that previous Labour governments have emphasised in their relations with India, including, for example, the issue of Kashmir and so on. Keir Starmer, in his campaign, has made a concerted effort to reach out to the Hindu vote in the UK, visiting the Swaminarayan Temple in Kingsbury, and promising to protect the interest of British Hindus during his campaign. So he is making an effort on that score. At the same time, he can't ignore other minorities in the UK, including the Pakistani and other Muslim diasporas in the UK, who represent, 1.2 million voters. And it's worth noting that several independent members of Parliament close to those communities have successfully defeated Labour candidates overnight and are now represented in the UK Parliament. So he can't be ignoring those issues.
You're right about that. And Jeremy Corbyn being one of them, he is one on an independent plank. And he is now, yes, you're right, that he's been a strong votary of some of those constituencies and some of those thoughts that India and the Hindu community have been very vociferously opposed to.
Yeah, and I think it's crucial to understand that those MPs, and indeed Labour MPs who represent large Muslim communities in their constituencies, will feel that it's entirely appropriate for them to be vocal advocates of those communities and their interests in Parliament. And India should not confuse their doing that with positions of the government itself. It's a key part of our democracy that MPs represent their constituents of all shapes and sizes and do so entirely freely. And this doesn't mean that this is a UK government position, but simply MPs representing their interests in Parliament in a free democracy. And that's a really important part of our system. And it's often a source of misunderstanding between the UK and India. But it's vital that everyone understands that this is MPs doing their job, representing their constituents, rather than necessarily being government policy.
Okay. Let's see how that plays out in the next couple of months and couple of years. But I want to ask you this, that will that have an overhang on Starmer's economic and foreign policies towards India? Do you see that having an overhang?
No, I mean, the UK and India have been pursuing a trade agreement over the past 3 or 4 years. This, has been making steady progress. And I imagine that, a re-elected Prime Minister Modi in India, the new Prime Minister Keir Starmer in the UK will, at the right moment, for both countries, resume those conversations. There is a deal. It's not a massively beneficial deal in terms of what it does for the UK economy, but there is a trade deal to be done at some point. And I'm sure those conversations will resume when it's mutually convenient for both sides.
Absolutely. And final question to you, Lord Johnson, is that from here on, as the next change in leadership takes place in UK and some of these difficult questions get ironed out as well, in the next 3 to 4 years, do you see how do you see the Tories reviving themselves to put up some sort of a leadership contest going forward?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, we're waiting to see how that plays out here in London today. There have always been different traditions within the Conservative Party in the UK, a free market tradition versus a more interventionist, big state tradition. There's been sort of previously big divisions between those groups who are more anti-European and pro-European. So, the battle for the future of the Conservative Party, I'm afraid, continues. This is a rather inward-looking battle that is not of massive interest to the country at large, and it prevents the party from sending out a clear message to the country about how it's going to help bring the country forward and take advantage of many of the great opportunities that are out there for the UK. But unfortunately, it does continue again for the time being.
As we speak, the latest numbers that are coming in is that it's 389 for Labour. It's pretty much in kissing distance of getting to that 400 mark, something that Tories would have never wanted Starmer to achieve. But that's what it looks like, making those decisions more tougher, but also more immediate.
Yes, it's a very big majority and a testament to the very disciplined campaign that Keir Starmer's Labour Party ran during this election, and also highlights the weakness of the Conservative offer to the country, fueled by infighting, a very sloppy campaign, possibly one of the worst in British political history. And inevitably, after 14 years of government, the country was already crying out for change, and the appalling campaign certainly didn't help the Conservatives sustain a strong representation in Parliament.
What worked for Labour, Lord Johnson? What worked for them the best to get the kind of numbers that we are talking?
Well, I mean, first of all, just the natural time and tide of change. You know, after 14 years in office, and the Conservatives, had started to become very inward focused on their own divisions. These were not the best advertisement of what the country could, for what the party could do for the country. Labour had a new leader in Keir Starmer, who has been very disciplined in reshaping the Labour Party, in very disciplined in terms of its messaging, in terms of making promises that he couldn't deliver. So focusing on a very narrow set of messages. And that has resulted in this extraordinary win tonight.
It indeed has. Final question, as I let you go, sir, which is that several analysts and experts feel, in fact, Lord Desai here in the studio also agrees, that we could be looking at a decade of Labour rule simply because it looks unlikely that Tories would be able to recover from this kind of a massive defeat.
Well, look, we've heard all that before on previous elections. So, we are entering what seems to be a much more volatile period of politics, not just in the UK, but globally, where big shifts can happen most unexpectedly against all the odds and against all the predictions. So, of course, this is a big majority, but I don't think anybody should take the voters for granted anywhere these days.
All right, Lord Johnson, thank you so much for speaking to NDTV. And let's wait for the next steps that the Tories will take from here on after these sombering numbers. Thank you so much, sir.